Hey everybody in YouTube land. My name is Stephen Goodson. I just felt a calling or an urge to do some Bible videos, and so I thought, um, why not put them on YouTube? See where this goes. If if it becomes popular, or even some people watch it, even 20 or 10 people watch it, and they feel encouraged. I may continue these videos and see where everything goes. I just felt for the last few months now just a calling or a feeling uh, to make these, and even in spite of uh, looking at other um, options or opportunities like sports or I'm a huge college football fan, so going in that direction would be fun. But this is something that's more meaningful to me, and I just want to be able to talk about this. And I want to hear your comments because if we all communicate together, we'll probably make more of an understanding of who Jesus is, who God is, and how He has impacted the people in the Bible, but also how He's still impacting us today, not only from the Bible, but in real life, in everyday life. So that's kind of where I wanted to start. Now to kind of start off in this section here of the Bible, I thought Matthew 8, 5 through 13, if you want to turn there, you can do that now, as a perfect place to start because we're talking about the centurion and Jesus, where the centurion asked Jesus to heal one of his servants. Um, the centurion sounds like a great guy. You know, sometimes somebody might ask you to forgive or not forgive, heal their son, daughter, or wife. But here we have a centurion actually wanting healing for his servant, which is pretty crazy. Just a few details or facts about centurions. They were in charge of 100 men to protect Rome from an invasion, or possibly they might keep control of the population. You know, kind of just doing whatever they need to do. It almost feels like they're the National Guard of Rome, where they just protect the home front and make sure everything's okay. Sometimes they would probably go out and fight outside of Rome, but most likely they'd stay in the area. This centurion, in order to become the centurion, would have had to spend about 20 years in the Roman military to get there. He would be the equivalent of probably a sergeant in the Marine Corps. That's another tidbit fact about him. So he would know Rome well. He would know the customs. He would know the orders of what they were supposed to do in general. He would know how everything operates, probably in the area, know all the leaders, hear stories, and follow up sometimes if they applied for him and his command to protect Rome. The interesting thing about the centurion is he knew Jewish customs. As we will read here, he knows who Jesus is as Lord, and he is able to take that and when Jesus comes along, he's able to take that over and identify him as such, and in fact recognizing his title means that he believes um, who God is, that He is a Lord, that He does control angels, as we will read here, and also that the just the people who are around this centurion also seem to care about him. The synagogue leaders in the area actually stick up for him, and they're the ones who help get attention for healing healing the centurion's servant. So we'll read here quick, and then I will kind of read through this, state a few things, and then we'll move on to the next part because I think that making these videos faster, and but also kind of adding information, make them packed with energy and facts, is kind of what seems to keep people excited and motivated, and that's kind of what I'm going to do here. So we'll read Matthew 8:5 through, I believe, 13, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. When he entered Capernaum, and I will probably stop for a few times. When we entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terrible." And he said to him, "I will come and heal him." So the centurion recognizes who Jesus is, and this servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. So not only is he paralyzed, but he's also suffering. Like, paralyzation is pretty bad, but then when you're also suffering on top of that for some unknown reason, I mean, obviously they didn't have hospitals back then. They probably had physicians, but you could only do so much. Even 100 years ago, we could only do so much. So this paralyzed person was not doing so good, and apparently the centurion cared so much about the servant that he stopped what he was doing, his 20-year career, and went to find Jesus to see what Jesus could and would do. Okay, so verse 7. And he said to him, "I will come and heal him." So we read that, but the next part here says, "But the centurion replied, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed." So he recognizes who Jesus is, and he says he's not worthy. You're a centurion. You've been working in the Roman army for 20 years, okay? You have a lot of worthiness. You have spent time, you know people in high positions, you probably go to these banquets, but here it says the centurion didn't think he was worthy to be in Jesus' presence, which means he recognized who Jesus was. He wasn't just Jesus was not just a prophet to him, or maybe he was, but I don't believe so. I believe the centurion recognized who Jesus was, and that Jesus could heal his centurion, or his servant, sorry. So he believes he just says the word, and the centurion's servant will be healed. Wow. Okay. So let's continue on before we go too far. "For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." So Jesus, this centurion understood the rule of command, that there were people under him that do what he asks, and he recognizes that Jesus does too. There is no other part that I've seen in Scripture where we see God and humanity especially recognizing who God is, and what He does and says, and recognizing who He is. So it's very much of a gift here. The Pharisees, you think they would be the ones who, they are following God, they're doing the Old Testament, they understand the Scriptures, so you think they'd be able to connect the Old Testament with the New Testament, but they don't. They don't do that, which really kind of annoys me, but on we go. So this centurion believes that Jesus has people, angels, and that will obey His commands and go where He wants them to go, which is crazy. So Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith." So all of Israel, okay, that's a lot of people, and a lot of these people have, at least the men, the Jewish men, have spent a lot of their childhood, at least a few years, learning the Torah. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible. They've learned it, and yet they still have a problem in connecting and having faith in who Jesus is. Okay, so this is kind of like, but it's also a blessing because this is a Gentile person. Most of us are not Jewish. There's a lot of people in the world who are not Jewish. I think my mom's like 0.03%. So just the fact, so that's not even that much Jewish, So the fact that this man believes who God is and Jesus is, and that Jesus is connected to God, is just amazing. And it will go on here in verse 11. I'm going to start there. I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness, in the place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And to the centurion Jesus said, "Go, let it be done for you as you believed." And the servant was healed at that very moment. So what this is saying is there will be some people who are automatically invited to the wedding. They'll be the godly people. They will be the Jews of this time. Some of them will be the ones who were invited, but they don't recognize who Jesus is, and so they will be thrown out into the darkness. They will not be accepted into God's kingdom. You think these Jews would understand, but some of them don't. And you know what? There's a parable where Jesus basically connects this, and he says that he asks his servants, Jesus asked his servants to go out there to just anyone and invite them, and whoever comes to his house, to his table, he will accept. There'll be some people who don't even do that. They'll get an invitation, and rightfully so, but they won't come. And so that is what Jesus is talking about here. The people that have faith and believe and trust in who God is. I have a few notes over here. I'm going to kind of continue to look off of here. Okay, so the Jews had 365 prophecies about who Jesus is. That's one for every day of the week for us, for every year. So that's just crazy. Like, they had a lot of time or a lot of prophecies to look through, especially the more learned Jewish people that practice their faith, and say, "Oh, look who Jesus is." They had 613 laws during Jesus' day, 248 positive laws, happy laws, so good laws, fun laws, laws that help benefit the people, and 365 negative laws, so laws that kind of added on, and they were good to some degree, but some of them weren't, and some of the Jewish and Pharisees would add laws for their own good to new situations that would also come up. That would be another reason to add on laws. And so you'd have a lot of these Pharisees, these religious leaders, not all of them, there might have been a few, but a lot of the religious leaders at the time who would look good, who would present well and show outwardly that they were following the laws, but their hearts weren't really in it. Were they really following all the laws in secret? Where were they at, really? Jesus, who knew people's hearts, called them whitewashed tombs. If you're God, you probably know people a little bit better because you actually created them. So I call them whitewashed tombs, which means that they look on the outside, everything was clean. You clean the outside, but the inside of the person was non-existent. They were dead. They were existent, but they were dead. And you have Pharisees, or at least religious leaders like Nicodemus, who came to Jesus and asked about all these things. And there were some who may have been pulled over, but a lot of Pharisees just were not open, at least at all, to what Jesus had to say. They thought he might be another false teacher, but he was completing all 365 prophecies that were mentioned how do I say this, mentioned about him before he was even born. So, kind of sad. I'm just kind of like, okay, well, this centurion has all these Roman gods that he could follow, and he recognizes who Jesus is. Like, that is insane. That is crazy. That doesn't happen all the time. Okay, so we contrast the Gentile here with Jesus' own. I'm going to move this paper out of the way because this I don't need anymore. But Jesus' own disciples. Okay, we have Jesus' own disciples, also the Jews. We talked about those a little bit. You know, the people who live in Israel, God's chosen people. We're going to shift over here to Matthew 14. Let's see, I'm going to make sure I got it. 13 here, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit. I'm going to move my transition over here to the right area. We're going to move over here to 14:13 and talk about Jesus feeding the 5,000. I don't know if I'll read it all, but I definitely want to hit a few parts here. Okay, so just reading 5,000. If you look through here carefully, in some versions it'll say 5,000 men. Okay, 5,000 men. Why is that significant? Okay, why does he keep saying men? Because that does not include women and children. Okay, with women and children, we're talking between, according to commentaries, we're talking between 10 and 15,000. Okay, people. Okay, now 5 loaves and 2 fish, as we read in here, were an afternoon meal. They were what you would get for an afternoon meal. Okay, and for one person. Okay, that was all they had. So as we read through this part, just keep that in mind. Like, they were not, this group of people were not close enough to just go, okay, let's go into town, it's 5 minutes away, and get the food we need. They were far enough that they would have to walk and come back, and they would have missed out on spending time with Jesus and hearing the message of who God is and was. Well, is. Maybe a little bit of was, but more is. Okay, so let's read 13. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat. So he's leaving, and he was withdrawing into a boat because he's with all these people. He just heard, keep in mind, he just heard about the death of John the Baptist. So his cousin, that's him. He was beheaded by Herod because Herod actually liked him, but Herod's daughter, is it daughter? His brother's Philip's wife, daughter. So it would have been his, I would have said his niece, or niece's step-niece, or something like that. So John the Baptist is beheaded at the request of Herodias, Herod's daughter, or step-niece, or niece, and maybe some of you can help me with that. But so Jesus is preached to a whole bunch of people, and so he's just withdrawn and wanting to do his own thing. Okay, so we'll read on here. But when he went ashore, so he went back ashore. These people followed him, by the way, because they wanted to hear more what he had to say. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd. So he travels on boat, and he comes ashore, and these people are still kind of following him on foot. And he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now when it was evening, the disciples, so it's later in the day, the disciples, these people are following him this whole time, and they're getting tired, and they're probably the sun has run on them a little bit, and they're getting hungry. The disciples here came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over." So they're out in the middle of nowhere. The area is not next to, possibly not next to a river, not close to anything that can kind of keep them going, and it's just out in the middle of nowhere. But Jesus said, in verse 16, but Jesus said, they need to not go away. You give them something to eat. They said to him, we only have 5 loaves here and 2 fish. So they only had basically an afternoon meal from one person who thought actually thought and said, I think I might need food today. And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowd to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds, and they all ate and were satisfied. So they liked the food, and there was enough of it. 10 to 15,000 people. It started off with one person bringing a meal, an afternoon meal, and it feeds 10 to 15,000 people. Okay? Then he broke the loaves and gave to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds, and they were all satisfied. Okay, so that's what we just read. And they took up 12 basketful of the broken pieces left over. You think God and Jesus were trying to say something? 12 baskets for 12 disciples. That is pretty crazy. You should ask a mathematician. If a mathematician is watching, I would like to know the statistical possibility of having 12 baskets for 12 disciples after everything is over, after all the food is eaten. All the baskets are distributed and people have all that they want. And then on top of that the food was good, and the impossibility of the food being created from nothing, or maybe growing in size to supply 10 to 15,000 people from just one. That is insane. And somebody didn't recognize that completely, what was happening maybe. I mean, Jesus blessed it, but how does that happen? Like, nobody not see, or that's double negative. Did somebody just not see what was happening to the food while the disciples and whomever else were handing it out? I mean, seriously? That's pretty crazy. So God did a really big miracle there. And if you connect this to the Old Testament, here's something crazy. You want to hear this? Moses, when the children of Israel were going through the desolate land between Egypt and Israel, where Israel is now, they did not have food. And you know who provided their food? It was God. He provided manna every day for these people to eat. Guess what God provided in presence? Jesus, kind of to signify this is me, for people to see that Jesus was God and that He Himself was there in their presence, providing them food and fish. He was not just in heaven, throwing down manna or providing manna. He was there. He was there among them, eating with them, in fact, most likely, eating the food that He performed a miracle with. Even after He just heard about the death of John the Baptist, He was still teaching. That is tough. You understand that? That is tough. But Jesus was able to do that because He is more than just a man. That is tough. And He was teaching them. So, Jesus comes to earth. He is the new Moses. He supplies the needs of His people. Moses prayed to God. God answered and sent manna. But this time, Jesus was there in person, and He provided food for you. In that desolate place where the Israelites were at, Jesus provided. When you ask Jesus into your heart, you're a son or daughter of His, right? You're His own. These people were His own people. They were the children of Israel. You are the children of Jesus. Jesus might not always give you what you want. I'm sure these people probably wanted shade or a breeze. Maybe they had one or the other. But Jesus gave them what they needed. He gave them food and nourishment, not just spiritually, but physically. And Jesus really cared about. He had compassion for these people. He cared about them. He showed emotion. He was not ignorant to their hunger. And God understood that, and God the Father and God Jesus worked together and provided a miracle. Okay, so we have this. So you think, okay, these Jewish people. Let's go back to the centurion for a second. The centurion believed who Jesus was. He was a Gentile. He may not have known everything about who the Jewish customs, who Jesus was, but he definitely knew a fairly good amount. So you think after this miracle, where God provides, in the Old Testament, God provides manna for the children of Israel, God himself. I mean, the Jews know that God is providing. You think that there's a connection between that and God providing for 10 to 15,000 people in person. That you think that would make a connection. And that's perfect. That's the reason why I read this, because it's the prelude almost to Matthew 14:22 through 33, when we're talking about Jesus walking out to the disciples after all this, feeding 15,000 people. He may be tired. He may be going, my cousin's dead. I just need to talk to God. I need to. I've been going through this horrible time, and I need a connection with God. And I've had to heal. I've had to heal people. I've had to feed them, and not just physically but spiritually. Talk to them about the kingdom of heaven. And so he's tired. Jesus physically is tired. He's also God, so he has some strength from that, as we've seen. He's going through a lot of different things you just mentioned, and he's had to come through. I mean, he hasn't had to come through. He chose to come through. He came to this earth to come through. So big stuff. So we kind of read here next here. Okay, so these disciples go from Jesus' preaching and the food, and they maybe or maybe not connected the Old Testament to the New Testament, where God provides the manna every day through the desert for the children of Israel, and God providing loaves of bread and fish for 10 to 15,000 people in the New Testament here, and who knows, maybe there was more people in the Old Testament, or I don't know if there was more people in the Old Testament versus the New Testament, where we have 15,000 people here. I assume there was probably more people back in the Old Testament going through the wilderness before they got to the land of Israel. But it's just very interesting stuff. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so the next part of the story, I want you to keep in mind that this boat that they're on, the disciples are in. They decide to go into a boat, and Jesus stays behind and just start and prays. Imagine this boat is 4.5 feet high. Okay, so find something in your area that it's about 5 feet high. I've got something over here. It is how high the boat is, how tall it is. Okay, 4.5 feet. I'm 6 foot. Okay, and that, like, what is he saying? I'm saying you'll probably maybe get a picture if you stand up, and maybe if you're short, you go, oh, 4.5 feet. If you're tall like me, you go 4.5 feet. And so it's still a little bit of height, and that's part of the craziness of this story. Okay, this boat's about 26.5 feet long, from what I looked up here. And so this boat is, let's see what we got here. Yeah, 26.5 feet long. So this boat is long, but it's high, but it's meant for calm water. Okay, it's not meant for what's about to come. They are in the dark, okay? They've been out in the water for probably a few hours. They are 3 miles out, and so that means, you're not in a motorboat. They are 3 miles out in a sailboat of sorts, and 4.5 feet, and so that's important to what we're about to read here. My goodness, this is a lot. In the dark, they didn't have a flashlight, okay? That's the other part of this, okay? Keep that in mind. Keep this all in mind. Okay, I'm about to read this story, and I hope you see it in a different light. This is something that becomes more exciting or more big time to you. Okay, so here we go. Immediately, verse 22, 14:22, Matthew. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side. So he didn't go with them like the last time. He was in the boat before, but he was sleeping in the boat during a storm. Ironically, there's two different storms here, two different times. And the second time, Jesus did not go with them. And somehow there was a storm. Okay? Keep in mind, oh, by the way, Jews in this time period, most of them could not swim. Okay? Most of them had trouble swimming. So that's a big deal. Okay. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. So he basically said goodbye to everybody. He had compassion on them and just wanted to say goodbye and answer questions and so on and so forth. Afterward, he dismissed the crowds and went up to the mountain by himself to pray. So he needed strength. Physically, his physical body needed strength. He just got done spending a whole bunch of time with these people, just answering their questions and saying goodbye. And he just heard about the death of John the Baptist, and so this guy is ready. His physical body, he's God, but his physical body, that he took upon himself when he came down to earth, needs a break. Okay, so he dismisses the crowd. When evening came, so it's evening. He spent the entire day, so he's probably getting tired, as everybody else. The disciples are probably growing tired as well. So he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from land, 3 miles, beaten by waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. Okay, so let's stop here for a second. Okay, so fourth watch of the night. Like I said, 3 o'clock. It's late. 3 o'clock in the morning, a.m. Okay, so you're tired. You spent the whole day with Jesus and hearing all that he has done and said, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so possibly you're not thinking about how Moses asked God to provide manna to the Israelites to survive, or he didn't ask specifically, but he asked for food, and God provided it. And Jesus just provided this food for the Israelites later on, and it was a miracle because they only had 5 loaves and 2 fish, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. So that's pretty crazy. Okay, so you're just tired, and it's black. You just see the lightning maybe flash a few times. One interesting thing I've seen in the commentary is the waves in the Sea of Galilee can get up to 10 feet high. So even if it's not 10 feet, let's say 5 to 8 or 9, that's still pretty significant because, as I said before, picture that 4.5 foot something you have around you, 4.5 feet of wood, and you're being thrown around by all this water. As you can imagine, a lot of Jews and other people at the time considered the sea and ocean as the abyss. It represented as a symbol of hell or chaos, because you're rocking back and forth. A lot of people had died in the water from these storms. So you can imagine these disciples going, "Oh my goodness, we're out here, and what's going to happen to us?" But Jesus told them to go out here, and Jesus was with them before when there was a storm, and he said, "A peace be still." So the disciples, even of just seeing Jesus' last miracle of healing 10 to 15,000 people, you'd think they would have had some of this in their knowledge. They would have seen this before, but again, they were tired and they were worn out. They had been through a lot. Okay, so let's see. Let's go on here. Verse 26, 14:26, Matthew 14:26. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. So they cried out in fear. They were obviously afraid. It's one thing to say that or feel that you're afraid. It's another thing to cry out. That means, it's pretty scary and you're tired and things are just not going your way, okay? But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Okay, so translated in Greek, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Translated in Greek from the commentary that I read from Bible Gateway, thank you guys, says, "I am." Where else have we heard that? It's when Moses was instructed by God to lead the children out of Israel, and Moses asked God, "Who should I tell sent me?" And God says, "I am." Tell them I am sent me. So very interesting analogy. God uses "I am" a couple times to describe himself. There is none like him. He is almighty. And Jesus here is using that title. And you'll see in a little bit that the disciples connect that, which is crazy because I didn't notice that till now. Okay, so that's something that is kind of new. I didn't plan on talking about here. But so the disciples connect that, the "I am" statement, to who Jesus is. Okay, so a little bit of crazy stuff. So it's dark, stormy clouds. Sometimes in the Sea of Galilee, by the way, it could have started out and it could have been nice in the evening and just pleasant. But they say that the Sea of Galilee, storms just come up quickly without warning. So that could be part of the problem here. Is they thought everything was fine. They probably would normally going out, but in their 4.5 foot high boat with 6 to 5, 3 to 4 to 6 to 10 foot waves, and trying to bail out water and try to keep the boat afloat, but they weren't planning on what was happening to them. Usually, these boats could house 15 men or have 15 men, but they had 12. So you have to figure too, the weight of this boat might have pushed the boat further down into the water, and the 4.5 feet high boat. Sorry, I'm talking too fast. The boat that's 4.5 feet high is down in the water because you not only have a little bit of water underneath the boat because you're sitting the boat on the water, but you also have the men, full-grown men, 12 of them in this boat, and Jesus makes 13, by the way, so it makes more weight. But you have these men in the boat who are weighing the boat down more, and they're trying to bail water out of it, and these waves are coming up over the 4.5 foot side of the boat, even though it's sunk down in the water, so maybe closer to 3.5 or 4 foot. And these guys are trying to bail water out as these huge waves are coming in. So that's just a lot for anybody to handle here. So they're tired, and we'll read on here. These disciples, by the way, could have been struggling with the storm for about 9 hours. From evening to morning, 9 hours of struggling, possibly less, possibly more, but most likely around that time or less. Okay, so these disciples are tired. Peter, this is just amazing for me. Peter pulls a centurion moment. He says, and it says here, after Jesus says, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." So Peter recognizes who's there, just like the centurion recognized who God was. And he says, Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Okay, let's be real here. Anybody ever been there? You initially trust God for something, and you're like, at the beginning, you're like, okay, God, I know you'll come through. I know you got my back. Okay, you're a good God, and I trust you. I've been through those nice times in your life myself where you're just like, God will come through. He's come through before, and even through smaller troubles. But this is a big problem. There have been big problems in my life. Getting through graduate school. Um, I got a graduate degree in counseling. Just to let you know where my mind is going with some of what we're talking about, and I've also taken a few classes in just Christian classes, Christian ministry classes. So that's kind of where I'm coming from a little bit. But you come from a point here where you're wondering, is God going to come through, or is someone going to die? Or is someone going to get hurt? These disciples are facing this. There's 12 of them. They've hung out for a little bit of time already. They probably have some friends in the group, or they're at least connected with Jesus, and they're trusting to some degree. They're trusting by following God that, or the prophet, whoever they think he is at this point, beforehand, that he's going to follow through and he's going to provide. That he is going to take care of them. While they're on top of the abyss at 3 o'clock in the morning, that he's going to take care of them. That's pretty tough. But Peter here says, I'm coming out. I'm going to walk. I'm going to try. And he looks at Jesus, and then he looks at the waves beside him, the insurmountable waves, and he says, I can't do this. Or he looks at the waves and thinks that these waves, the abyss, this hell that he's walking on, is bigger than Jesus is. And he begins to sink. Have you been there? That's a pretty big deal. So I just want to give you faith that Jesus is who he is, and that he did save Peter. Um, oh, you a little faith, why did you doubt? Ironically, Peter taking a step out of the boat was a whole bunch of faith. But when Peter looked at the waves, and instead of looking at Jesus, that's when a little bit of faith was there, and he started to sink in the water, into the abyss, into hell. But you know what? The crazy thing about this is Jesus saved him even though he had lacked faith. Jesus is not immune to people not having a lot of faith. In fact, all he says in the Bible, if you have the faith of a mustard seed about this big, you can move mountains. If you have faith in God. So that's pretty crazy, and your faith can only increase when you see who God is. Perhaps writing it down, or just having a list of things that God has done as God has pulled you through, would be great for anyone. So in the end here, and those both worshipped him, saying, Truly you are the Son of God. So God has not only shown that he's a commander of the Gentiles and healing Gentiles who have faith, he is also showing that he heals people. He saves people with lack of faith, even people who probably should have understood and be believing who he is, like the disciples who actually seen a lot of his miracles, including just watching him feed 10 to 15,000 people and walk on water. But he's with you on the chaos of life. He's riding the waves with you. He's walking the waves. Jesus could have just stood on the shore and watched his disciples drown. He could find new disciples. He could find more disciples with more faith. He could find disciples with more belief and understanding of the Jewish customs and who God is. He could have created disciples like that, but he chose you because of who you are, and he sees the potential and where he wants to go with you, where sometimes you all can't. And I'm not saying you all, I mean us, we all. So, I'm reading here just quickly. The Sea of Galilee, just by the way, is about 200 feet deep. So if you can imagine that as if as someone drowning, you can drown 200 feet. But Jesus didn't let them drown. Part of this is developing a relationship of trust, understanding that God has got control and you don't have control, but he will save you. That's something that's very difficult for me right now. And I know not every theologian will talk about what struggles they're going through or go really much in depth because they feel like they want to have control and understanding of the scriptures and to show that. But for me, that's huge. You know, not having control of who I'm going to marry or where I'm going to work, what tomorrow is going to be like. You know, I live in Indiana. You know, we have snow and ice out here, and some of you guys are going, but we don't. I mean, we do. We have snow and ice, so I could go out and drive tonight and slide and hit something and maybe be in heaven tomorrow. You know, so just being able to trust that God has your best interests at heart and he cares more about you than you care about yourself. I mean, if he's willing to die on the cross for your sins and save you that way, like he did, then he must care about you a lot, more than he cares about his own pain. So that is something to be said. And God cares enough about you that he sent his own son to die for you. So that's crazy. When you're going through life, know that Jesus is with you and he cares about you and he wants you to succeed. That's hard to believe, isn't it? I wish I had some words to just say, this is how you really know, for sure, absolutely. But that's a pretty good way, what I just said. Just being thankful, thinking of something to be thankful for. Max Lucado's book, Anxious for Nothing book, is a great book for those who are anxious and are like, is God really going to save me? Does he really care? I don't have a lot of control. Just thanking him for what has worked out, for what you do have. Writing it down is something I've done as well. Just realizing all that God has done behind the scenes and even in your presence that you have seen is crazy. And reading about the Bible, reading this stuff, you know, where Jesus comes through with a mentally, physically, and spiritually tired and exhausted people, and his own disciples who he'd been with for a year or two, three, well, not 3 years, but probably a year or two, and who knew him and trusted him, and Jesus came through, and they didn't die. Jesus was there. They went through a hard time. Jesus was there. They survived, and they were stronger for it. They called him a son of God at the end. Truly, you are the Son of God. That's in Matthew 14:33. They finally got it. Jesus put them possibly through that hard time so that they might get who Jesus really is. And this hard time that you might be going through, or perhaps you have gone through, you will go through probably, if you know, if you're, I was going to say if you're young enough, but even if you're old enough, you will go through a hard time where the winds will be blowing, where you're scared, you cry out, you should believe, but you're scared, and God will take your hand as you're drowning and will keep you afloat. He will hold you there, and he may say, "Oh, ye little faith," but in the end, it's about him. But in the end, it's about you going, "Truly, you are the Son of God," and saying, You have saved us, you have redeemed us, you care for us, you will restore us um, as Jesus will, and trusting in the end in heaven that everything is going to be made right, and that Jesus is taking us through trials, or trials are happening to us, so that Jesus can prove who He is, and He can make you who you are in Him, and make you more like Him. So I hope that's just an encouragement. A lot of interesting facts, a lot of interesting in story. Like I said, if you have anything to add, I'd just be awesome. I mean, that would be great, because I'm not like the person who knows everything about the Bible. I know some of the things in the Bible, and so just being able to hear more of what you guys have found, or perhaps there's another scripture that you guys want me to hit, or a trouble or a trial that you're going through. And like I said, if there's um, enough people watching, even 10 to 20 people, I will do another one. I just want this to be beneficial to somebody out there, and who knows? We'll see how far this goes. But until then, this is Stephen Goodson, by the way, um, signing off. I'm glad you guys watched, and I look forward to next time when we can go more in depth on who God is. I'll try to think of a title here, but um, at this point, it's about learning who God is, and that is the strength. That is the strong point that we should be centered on. So, all right, thank you guys for listening to me for this long, and um, I just appreciate you guys, and um, yeah, I hope you like it, and you can let me know, and if there's anything to change, let me know. I mean, I promise, I'm not going to promise I'm going to change everything, but I really just want to put out God's message here, not my own, and say and do the right things here. You know, I want to stay core to the Christian faith. So, thank you guys again, and I hope to see you again at some point. So, talk to you later. Bye.